the Identity Maze, where we explore the paradox of human connection in the global age. I'm Ava. Let's step into the maze. A man is attacked. A video is recorded. The footage spreads. And before the facts are fully settled, a city begins to burn. Some people are angry. Some are afraid. Some people are certain they already know exactly what happened, and some are certain they already know who is to blame. But here's the question. At what point did a violent incident become something more? At what point did a video become a symbol? At what point did a symbol become a side? And at what point did that side become action? Because before a crowd forms, before an argument begins, before a riot erupts, something else happens first. People decide what the event means. And once enough people agree on the meaning, the consequences become real. This isn't just a story about Belfast. It's a story about fear, belief, identity, and algorithms, and the fragile space between watching and reacting. This is the Identity Maze reality check, and this is how one video became a riot. This story began with a violent incident, a real victim, a real suspect, a real investigation, a real community shaken by something brutal, a real community trying to understand what had happened. But then something else happened. Almost immediately, the event became content. The video moved through social media. People did not simply see an attack, they saw a story. And depending on who was watching, that story meant something different. Reporting described how a knife attack in Belfast was filmed and rapidly circulated online. News organizations reported that the footage spread widely across social media, was amplified by influential accounts, and became what some analysts described as a trigger event. So let us slow this down, because that is exactly what social media rarely allows us to do. There was an attack. There was a suspect. There was an investigation. Those are facts. But facts rarely travel alone. They travel with meaning. For some, it was evidence of a wider immigration crisis. For others, it was proof of far-right exploitation. And for some, it was simply a horrific crime. Same event, different meanings. And once meaning enters the picture, human psychology follows close behind. And that is where the Identity Maze begins. In episode 1, we explored why humans create enemies, and here we can see that process unfolding in real time. A violent act becomes larger than the people directly involved. The suspect stops being only a suspect. He becomes a symbol of immigration, a symbol of danger, a symbol of everything some people already feared. And once a person becomes a symbol, it becomes easier to turn a group into an enemy, because the mind begins to shift from who did this to what does this confirm? And those are very different questions. The first seeks understanding. The second seeks validation. That is how enemies are often created, not from knowledge, but from fear searching for a face. And once fear finds a face, it becomes easier to stop seeing the individual, and easier to start seeing a category, a label, an enemy. Then we arrive at episode 2. Because after the footage spread, intelligent people looked at the same event and reached completely different conclusions. Some saw proof of a wider social problem. Some saw evidence of political manipulation. Some argued the incident was being exploited. Others argued the incident itself was being ignored. Same footage, same event, different beliefs, but why? Simply put, information never arrives alone. It arrives through a lens, a political lens, a cultural lens, personal experience, historical memory, fear, belonging, identity. A video does not enter an empty mind. It enters a mind already filled with assumptions, experiences, loyalties, and expectations. Which means two people can see the same thing and walk away with entirely different truths. Not because one is smart and the other is foolish, but because human beings interpret before they understand, and often believe before they know. We then arrive at the third layer, the psychology of picking sides, because social media rarely rewards hesitation. It rewards reaction. Condemn, defend, share, argue, choose. The side often arrives before the understanding, and once a side is chosen, everything begins organizing itself around that choice. People pursue information that supports it, accounts that reinforce it, communities that validate it. Certainty begins to grow, and uncertainty begins to disappear. But certainty is not the same thing as understanding. That is one of the most dangerous illusions of the digital age, because certainty feels good. Understanding takes work. And when emotions are running high, most people reach for certainty first. So a complex event becomes a simple story. A simple story becomes a position, and the position becomes an identity. And finally, we arrive at episode 4, perhaps the most unsettling layer of all, because this story did not spread simply because it mattered. It spread because it captured attention. Think about the ingredients: violence, fear, identity, outrage, uncertainty, a shocking video, a divided audience, a demand for immediate judgment. This is exactly the kind of content modern platforms are built to amplify. Not because an algorithm understands Belfast, not because it understands history, not because it understands justice or grief or social tension. It doesn't. Algorithms don't understand meaning. They understand engagement. They learn what makes us stop scrolling, what makes us click, what makes us react, what makes us share, what makes us angry enough to comment, and what makes us afraid enough to warn others. That is the uncomfortable truth. The platform doesn't need to understand the story. It only needs to understand our response to it. And once enough people respond, the story begins feeding itself. More outrage, more certainty, more reaction, more division. The cycle continues, not because somebody planned it, but because our reactions feed the system, and the system feeds our reactions. More outrage, more certainty, more reaction, more division, and the cycle continues. This is where the story becomes bigger than Belfast, because every society contains fear. Every society contains uncertainty. Every society contains people looking for answers. The question is what happens when those things collide with technology designed to maximize attention. A violent act should be investigated. A victim deserves justice. A suspect deserves due process. Community deserves the chance to grieve. But social media often transforms something else entirely. Grief becomes outrage. Outrage becomes identity. Identity becomes mobilization. And mobilization produces consequences. Homes are attacked. Communities fracture. People become targets. And individuals who had nothing to do with the original crime become symbols for meanings attached by others. That is where the danger lives, not only in the original act, but in the stories we build around it. Because once a story becomes emotionally useful, people stop asking whether it is complete and start asking whether it confirms what they already fear. So, what does this moment reveal? It reveals that humans still create enemies. It reveals that beliefs can form before facts settle. It reveals that sides can be chosen before understanding arrives. And it reveals that algorithms can quietly amplify the parts of us most likely to react. This is the identity maze in the real world, not as theory, not as philosophy, but as consequence. And perhaps that brings us back to the question we started with. How did one video become a riot? Perhaps the deeper question is, what happened inside us between watching and reacting? Because that is where the maze begins. A person becomes a symbol becomes a side becomes a crowd becomes action, and action becomes consequence. Until next time, keep questioning the stories, especially the ones that feel most certain. Welcome to the Identity Maze. This is the Identity Maze, hosted by Ava Dana. Thanks for listening. If this conversation made you think a little differently, share it with someone. If you enjoyed the episode, follow the show and join us next time. New episodes explore how beliefs form, how tribes emerge, and why changing our minds can be one of the hardest things we ever do.